Link Monsters are a new mechanic that's just recently been added to Yu-Gi-Oh! Or at least revealed to be added. The OCG, the guys who play this game over in Japan and Asia, will be getting this mechanic sometime in the first half of this year, while we will be getting it more towards July and August. If you haven't been to my blog before, it's over at silvercontrol.wordpress.com. It's where I'm going to be talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of what I write for TCGplayer.com, which of course you should go check out if you want to see a lot of quality content, a lot of quality writing from several different authors. Alright, so, Link Monsters. I wrote this article because I wanted to talk about my first impressions while it's still fresh, while we're still kind of developing ideas, and also in part for myself, because I wanted to see what my impressions would be later on and how different they would be from now. Likely there's a lot of things I'm going to say here that are just going to be wrong later down the road. I'm talking about the impacts on synchros and other extra deck summons that we could find out later, well, it was all a bunch of noise about nothing. Maybe these decks aren't going to be hurt as bad as we think they are. Maybe they're going to be crushed. It's hard to know until it actually happens, and right now we don't even have this in the OCG, so we're really bad at predicting things when the OCG hasn't even touched it yet. Anyways, let's talk about what I've written in this article. Link will be in the description, of course, to go and click on it. So, Link Monsters, what are they? They are these new monsters that go on our extra decks. They essentially enable us to summon more monsters to different zones. Now, you don't actually have to play them that way. You can play them how they're written on the card. You can play them as their own monsters. They have their own built-in effects. They do things with link zones. You don't have to use them specifically to facilitate summons of other kinds of extra deck monsters. But that's largely what a lot of people are looking at, because that's the perspective that we come from right now, which is that the game is based around synchros, exceeds, pendulums, and fusion monsters, in addition to other kinds of summoning in the main deck. So when you influence those extra deck summonings, it becomes, okay, how do I play around Link monsters? So basically, you have that 6 monster card zone. It's the extra monster zone, and then the other 5 are your main monster zones. And very, very simply, if you put a Link monster in that extra monster zone, any of the arrows on the card that are pointing to your zones, your main monster zones, those zones become viable places to summon your extra deck monsters. Previously you couldn't. We found out very recently, just earlier this morning, that Pendulum Monsters, indeed, when they are summoned from the extra deck, must be summoned to either the extra monster zone or a linked zone. And so that's obviously in line with what we see from synchros and exceeds and fusions. Okay, so the link markers are important. There's some other details about that. I really won't get into too much. If you want some more information, I have a link here that goes to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Organization. They have a great write-up and description of that, and you can find that stuff elsewhere. All right, so let's talk specifically, how does this impact the extra deck summoning types that we already have? So with fusion monsters, there are a few fusion themes that kind of want to summon a lot of different fusion monsters, stuff like Frightfur and Invoke, they want to summon a lot. Even Shadows, wanted to summon a lot. But right now, there aren't a lot of very competitive fusion themes. We're looking at stuff like, coming out in Fusion Enforcers, obviously, we have Invoked. There's more Fluffle support, and then there's Predaplant support. So Predaplants are never going to be competitive. Fluffles are kind of whatever, and then Invoked are cool as a tech engine. I don't really know exactly how competitive they're going to be yet, but certainly under these new rule changes, it's going to be harder for them to play, because now they're going to have to try to use all of these extra mechanics, and that's going to be the case throughout the rest of these as we keep going. The Invoked deck actually does have a lot of options on hand. In fact, a lot of its summoning conditions, or a lot of its summoning spell allows it to use materials that are in the graveyard, so that you can free up your normal summon and also use monsters that you summon, send them to the graveyard, and then play your linked monster and go from there. So basically, when you're playing the fusions, you're going to want to prioritize fusion materials that you can use in the hand or in the graveyard. You don't want to be summoning monsters to the field and then using your using your fusion summons, because you want those cards that you commit to the field to go towards links. So decks that can summon just one fusion monster and that's all they need, well, they don't really care about this change too much. So like if you're summoning just Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon, or just invoked Mechabot, then you don't really care. There's an interesting synergy actually here with Vortex Dragon. If you're not pendulum summoning those monsters because you have your only zone is taken up by Vortex Dragon, well, you might as well shuffle them back into your deck to negate things. So there's a strategy you could build around that that doesn't involve summoning things from the extra deck, but just involves sitting on Vortex Dragon. And then, of course, we have cards like Greedy Venom Fusion Dragon. This card skips off the field, and then it comes back. That's pretty handy because you can summon it back to a main monster zone. And then, of course, we have all of these single-use fusions, like Norden, Seraph Knight, Panzer Dragon, things that they don't stick around. You don't need them to stick around. They're not going to clog up your zone. You're going to use them. You're going to be done with them. And you're going to get them off the field. And then you don't really care as much. Okay, so Synchro Monsters. So the big thing here is that a lot of people like to play Synchro Spam. And then not that just they like to play it, but that it's been very successful for a very long time. And essentially it's telling, the idea of synchro climbing or using synchro tuners and, spamming the board with synchros, well, that kind of dies with the linked mechanic. Now, you've probably seen a bunch of Turn 1 Quasar videos on YouTube. They're out there. You can look them up. And essentially, they're like, look, you can still make Quasar Turn 1. You can still spam if you manipulate your links the right way. Okay, some of those are a little inconsistent. But keep in mind, these are the very first Link monsters that we're getting. We're talking about the very first reveal of Link monsters. I guarantee you we will see broken Link monsters come out that will make synchro strategies be able to spam as much as they want again. Guaranteed. It'll happen because Konami cannot help themselves. So just keep that in mind. Okay. But in general, for now, the number of broken hands you have is reduced because now to have a broken hand, you're going to need an additional 1 or 2 other cards to make sure that Link summon happens. So it makes them less consistent. It doesn't make them impossible to work. It just makes them less consistent, less explosive, all those sorts of things. Yeah, so if you used to win the game, or you have played a deck that used to win the game by flooding the field with synchros, you're going to have a harder time winning. Further, basically any deck that wants to sit on a single synchro, or summons a synchro and then gets rid of it, they're in an actual, pretty decent position, or like a synchro you can summon and then get rid of. So, for instance, Yang Zings right now, they're known for synchro spam, but they could just make Chao Feng and sit on it. They could just make Denlong, search 9 pillars, set it, and then sit on that, and then make Herald of the Arclight. Those sorts of plays. And Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon is still really good. You can tech the Wind Witch engine into just about anything, and just summon the Synchro Dragon and then just sit on it. And provided the rest of your deck maybe is probably a lot of main deck monsters, not a lot of extra deck summoning, that's still a viable strategy. And then, of course, we have cards like Psyframe Lord Omega, Stardust Dragon, Colossal Fighter, Drill Warrior, Stardust Warrior, Ancient Sacred Wyvern, even Angel of Zera, which can return to the field in a main monster zone. So you can free up your extra monster zone that way and summon more than one synchro. They're just a little bit more conditional and they require a little bit more work to function correctly. And of course, if you're using something like Black Rose Dragon, you don't really care that much about synchro summoning another monster on top of it. Okay, so finally, or not finally, actually, we're halfway through. So we'll get to Xyz Monsters here. So, Xyz Monsters, I think, are personally in the best position post Links, partially due to the rank up mechanics and partially due to the fact that a lot of decks that are playing Xyz don't necessarily spam them. And I know that sounds strange coming from this format right now, where we're looking at Zodiacs. Zodiacs are kind of an outlier. It's not super common to see decks spam Xyz as much as they spam Synchros or Pendulum Monsters. And so, in this case, especially with the rank up stuff, decks like Raid Raptors don't care about this change quite as much because they can still create their one big summon and rank it up. This doesn't stop Lightning from being really good. This doesn't stop Diamond Direwolf from being bad or for being good because you can just blow itself up and then nuke a card. and then Castel. So you can summon Castel, you can kick something away, and let's say you have, even if you don't have another monster, then you can kick it away for like a one link and play that card, because now you're done with it. You don't need to do anything with it. So any like single use Xyz is still really handy. And in fact, the link mechanic gives you something to do with Xyz that you've spent your materials on, or you've used that effect for that turn. Which, yeah, personally, I think is really interesting. Like Bujinti Tsukiyomi, now you can get rid of it right away, and right away get to that ABC summon. In some cases where you might want to do that, and especially where if you can then immediately go into the ABC drag or Buster Dragon and then summon another monster because now you've got your links and go from there. And of course, again, there are plenty of decks that can sit on a single Xyz. And I draw a comparison back to the days of Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand. Remember that in Sylvans? Remember when they used to play Felgrand here? So that strategy still exists. You can play it with trains in number 81, Super Dreadnought, Rail Cannon, Super Dora. Take a breath. And so the True Kings and True Dracos rarely need more than a single True King VFD the Beast to achieve their win condition. You just make that card and you can sit on it. You can summon it back with Lithogasm. And so these decks aren't hurt that much. And so finally we get to pendulums. So this is where my optimism kind of fades away, because pendulums really get slaughtered by the change where they can't pendulum from the extra deck. So any theme or strategy that really relies on somebody from the extra deck, or like loading the extra deck really fast, so say Perform Pals, hates this change because they get destroyed. Their card advantage sources get destroyed. Anything that like loads cards in the extra deck just isn't as good anymore. So like the new Zephyr monster come out, it's just not as good anymore. But it's still okay. And the reason I say that there is some life left for pendulums, which seems strange, even though you can't send the pendulums to the graveyard for the link summons, is that in some cases it's okay to just pendulum summon one monster. And then two, there's a lot of opportunity still to summon monsters that go back to the hand. Like pendulum summoning from the hand is a very underrated mechanic because it's not busted as much as summoning from the extra deck. But if you think about cards that return to the hand, Mist Valley Apex Avian being one, Magispector Unicorn Kirin being another, it's actually not too bad. Now the downside with this is that even if you're just pendulum summoning the one monster and then it's like a single use card, it's like there's at least one Zephyr card that I didn't write down, but it like destroys itself and other monsters, kind of like a Scrap Dragon. There's one that targets face up, one that targets set cards, and even if you kind of use them that way, it doesn't really help you because you can only pendulum summon once per turn. So this strategy is really, or this summoning method has probably hurt the most, specifically because you can only pendulum summon once per turn. Keep in mind that you can synchro summon, Xyz, and fusion summon as many times as possible per turn, but you can only ever pendulum summon once per turn. So decks that rely on their pendulum summons are going to be hurt by this. Decks that do play pendulums and do pendulum summon, but don't pendulum summon from the extra deck as much, they'll be okay. They might be okay. And I think we should keep an eye out for those and not simply say that, oh, pendulums are 100% dead. But I think it's going to be uphill. Definitely going to be uphill because it's the hardest possible themes to introduce links into, because you need to play non-pendulum monsters and somehow shoehorn those in. And good luck with that. So yeah, and this reminds me actually with pendulums of synchros when they were slaughtered on the 2012 Forbidden and Limited list. If you guys remember back then, when we saw Glow Up Bulb, Spore, Tengu get limited, and then Trishula also get banned, it was like the death of synchros. Like nobody played synchros anymore after that. It was like just nobody played it because there wasn't any like big synchros to make anymore. There wasn't a Crystal Wing. There wasn't anything like that. So we didn't see them, and like in fact, Konami used this as marketing to be like, look, synchros are back in Judgment of the Light. And by that point, we were like, oh, thanks. So that is it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think about the link mechanic. I'm really interested in hearing more. I'm I'm keeping an open mind, but I'll talk about my criticisms further. And of course, keep an eye on this space. I'm going to be writing more articles here that just kind of off the cuff stuff. Very, um, very, I want to sit down and write and get a thought out and then and push it out there to people and see what they think. Um, so yeah, thank you guys for watching, and until next time then.